Okay. Well, welcome everyone to this month's Thrive Talk. I'm Jenna Cosroy, co-founder and president of WealthThrive, the most trusted name in tax strategy and a company built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. We host these sessions because we believe that entrepreneurs are the heroes of this world. You're creating jobs, driving innovation, and making the economy move. And our mission is to help you live rich beyond money while building businesses that are strong enough to support the lives you want. So today we're diving into a topic that every entrepreneur eventually faces, which is why companies fail to scale. I'm thrilled to be hosting Bradley Hajart from Next Level Catapult, who has prepared a powerful framework-driven presentation that breaks down the real reasons why businesses hit ceilings and really what to do about it. So I'm excited, and as people continue to join, take a moment to settle in, clear distractions. Today's content is going to be the kind that is going to meaningfully shift how you run your company. So Bradley, I'm very excited to welcome you. I'm excited to have you. The floor is yours.
Well, Jenna, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing these perspectives and these learnings that we've had over the last many years helping companies. So hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Brad Hajart from Next Level Catapult, and today we're going to talk about something that almost every business leader faces at some point, and it's the challenge of scaling that business. There's a moment in a company's journey where what used to work stops working, and that growth slows down, and the team feels frustrated. The founder feels stuck, and ends up getting back in the weeds, trying to firefight and fix problems. And we see this all the time. It's a very common issue for founders and CEOs. And in our advisory work, helping companies build better processes and as well as plan for an exit, this is a common problem that we help solve on a regular basis. So wanted to share kind of what we learned over the course of working with hundreds and hundreds of different companies. So today, I want to unpack the 5 biggest reasons that we see on a regular basis companies failing to scale. And more importantly, is not just what are they, but what can you do about them? How can you actually start to solve for them? So for those of you who don't know us, Next Level Catapult is a business advisory firm and an exit planning firm. We help leadership teams scale smarter, build stronger and smarter systems, and ultimately create a business that is going to thrive with or without the founder. And what's really critical is that, especially when it comes to an exit, is that a business learns to live without a founder, right? Because they're not always going to have that individual running the business down the road. But particularly when it comes to exit planning, if you can't function without the founder, you're never going to be able to scale the business. And what we found through working with hundreds of different companies is that along this growth journey, very consistent patterns start to emerge, and we're going to go through what those patterns are today. So we spent a few minutes. We're going to spend a few minutes on each of the themes that were these 5 themes that we're going to talk about today, and you'll probably recognize yourself or your company being stuck in some of those, and maybe you're in one of these right now. Maybe you've encountered other ones in the past. Maybe some of them you haven't seen yet, but I would venture to guess that you will at some point. And the goal isn't to feel today like we're calling out you or your organization, but it's to help you identify what levers we can use to unlock your next level of growth, right? And so by identifying what those common roadblocks are, we can, and giving you the tools to overcome them, it'll help you move back to growth mode. So accountability. Almost every scaling problem starts here. And it starts with the leadership team. And this is typically one of the first things that we end up identifying and having to address within a business that is stuck. And when we walk into that company that's stuck, 9 times out of 10, the real issue isn't strategy, it isn't talent, it's accountability. And it's a team that avoids the hard conversations. And somewhere along the way, in most businesses, the team decides that disagreement is bad. But disagreement isn't bad. It's actually healthy. And the goal isn't to have universal harmony. it's about having alignment, right? And there's a big difference between having alignment and having harmony, right? You can have difference of opinion, you can disagree, and you can still align and commit to a direction. And so the best teams, they debate openly, they challenge ideas, they still walk out of the room though after all of that debate and all of those different ideas. They walk out of the room with a single committed direction. And if you've ever read any of Patrick Lencioni's books, he has a line what I absolutely love and I use it all the time, which is disagree and commit, right? Even if we don't agree on the final strategy, we have to come together and commit to a single approach to the business. And if you there's another book I love, and I have most of the teams that I work with read this book. It's called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a great read. I encourage you to read it. There's also the audiobook is great. It's a simple little listen, and it's done in kind of a business storytelling format. So it's really interesting and very engaging. But it tells this tale of a dysfunctional team and how they operate out of fear, and they avoid conflict, and they spend time blaming one another for strategy that doesn't work, right? And this creates chaos within not just the executive team but within the entire organization. For many of us who've worked in other larger organizations, one of the things that you'll see regularly is one or more people within a leadership team who don't agree with a strategy will maybe they'll debate it, maybe they'll have a vigorous dialogue against it, but then when that decision is made and they don't agree with it, they walk out of that room and they go to their team and they say to the team, hey guys, this is what we're going to be implementing. I don't agree with it. I fought tooth and nail to make sure that we went a different way, but this is what the leadership team wants to do. So we're going to do it. But when it fails, we're going to be right. Right. And that perspective is very common within a leadership team. And again, that's the foundation of a dysfunctional team, right? That an individual or individuals are focused on avoidance and blaming, and it creates this chaos. So what does a healthy team look like? Well, first, there's got to be trust. And one of the things that we do when we start working with an executive team is we work on trust building activities. And how can we ensure that we trust that when we disagree, when we debate, when we have a different perspective, that we're going to listen, that we're going to be open, that we're going to have an honest conversation. And even when we don't necessarily get the direction that we champion, that we trust in the decision of the group and that we are going to commit to moving forward with that strategy, and that we're going to execute it as if it's our own. And that's really what the heart of what disagree and commit is even when you disagree, committing to execution of it as if it's your own idea. So that's where accountability really comes into play. If you're accountable to the team, if you're accountable to the organization, you're going to be able to have those vigorous debates. You're going to be able to commit. You're going to be able to execute with one mind. Okay, so if accountability is where most scaling problems start, it's also where you have to start with the fix. So when a leadership team avoids accountability, what typically happens is that people don't know what's most important, right? Deadlines will slip. Your best people will get frustrated because there's no one holding each other accountable. No one's complying with the same system. And when you see great people, great talent, one of the more common traits is that they're inwardly motivated. They don't need someone to motivate them to do what needs to get done to be successful. They are able to find that energy, that focus within. However, not everyone's like that. And when they see others who don't have that inward focus, that inward motivation, and they're not held to the same accountability that your best talent holds themselves to, it becomes very frustrating. You see great talent leave because of that. So scaling companies need to engage in productive conflict. And that's the kind of conflict that surfaces real truths and creates real commitment, right? When you've debated an idea or concept to the resolution, and you can agree on a single direction, then you're able to commit to it. So first, it's on the leader to model this out, right? When the leader doesn't model it, the rest of the organization will not follow along. So when you make a mistake, you've got to call it out, right? You have to be able to be responsible for your own missteps. And when you miss something, own it. And what that does is signal to the team that accountability isn't just punishment, but is professionalism. And so, I think there is a belief, and in some organizations, there's the reality of where accountability becomes, a way to punish the wrong decision, right? And sometimes the wrong decision is just a path to get to the right decision. And so, any organization that is accountable will understand that being accountable and holding yourself and your team accountable is really just a reflection of holding up the principles of the business. Second is you've got to create space for healthy conflict, and disagreement is progress, right? If it's about ideas and not egos. And I know that many of us have worked in settings where disagreements start in debate, and it turns out that that's a result of egos and not necessarily having a disagreement of ideas. How many times you've sat in seen two executives debate a topic, and what you realize after 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes of round and round debate, they have the same perspective. They have the same, the same idea, the same direction. They just say it in a different way, and that is usually born out of ego because we're not listening to one another, and that we're not having clear and concise, discussion, and instead we're trying to be the loudest voice in the room. So healthy conflict is great as long as it's about ideas and not about egos. And then third, ending every meeting with crystal clear commitments. Clarity is absolutely critical. You need to know who's doing what and by when. And if it's not captured, then accountability will die at that meeting, right? The minute the Zoom call ends, the minute the in-person meeting ends, and there's no clarity of commitment, there's going to be no follow through. So it's critical if you can build if you can model the right behavior, if you can build true healthy conflict, and if you can clearly identify the commitments that we've made during that conversation, then you're going to have an organization that is built for accountability and ultimately is built for scale. All right, the visionary trap. This is the kind of the it's the second biggest barrier that we see, and we call it the visionary trap because visionaries fall into this so often. And this is where the founder or the CEO becomes the bottleneck. They're putting out fires all day. They're answering every question. They're handling every customer problem. And look, I get it. I've been there. This is the third company that I've been a founder or co-founder of. And it feels like if you don't do it, then everything's going to fall apart. But the reality is that if you're solving every problem, then you're not leading, you're rescuing. And this is where most founders get frustrated and they feel demoralized, and it becomes a reason, a catalyst for a lot of founders to look to exit a business because they've hit a wall. They feel like they're firefighting all the time and they can't break through that, and they get frustrated and they say, well, maybe I can't lead the business. Maybe I'm not the person that can bring the vision to fruition. And when the reality is the reason that's happening is because the visionary is now stepped out of a visionary role and they're trying to play an executional role. And I get it. When you start the business early on, you're it, right? In a lot of cases, the founder may be one or two or three or four people in the early stages of business. So they have to wear a lot of hats. So they know a lot of stuff. And they're also very passionate about the business. So it becomes common for them to want to step in and firefight every little thing. But you need to be able to step back and be able to invest your time in a visionary role so that you can grow and scale the business and allow the firefighting to be done by a really trusted support team or number two, right? So that's really critical that you can refocus your efforts away from firefighting back to being a visionary. All right, so how do you do that? So escaping this trap isn't about working harder. And unfortunately, that's how most founders think about it. It's like, I can put in more hours, I can put in more time, I can work weekends, and that's going to get us through this hump so that now I can turn back to being a visionary. And the reality, that's not what happens. So it's about leading differently. And the first thing that we find to be the most common first step is that you need a team, or you need to build a team that you can actually trust to run the day-to-day. So if you're the only firefighter, your business isn't structured right. You need to find one or more other people who can step in, take a high level of ownership, who are strategic, who can think, who can problem solve, and identify and fix these problems so that you can step back and be the visionary that the business needs you to be. The second is install a system. EOS, scaling up, we have our own system called Boss, but installing some type of management system that creates structure and rhythm and visibility and consistency so that it runs without you. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but having systems and processes in place is really critical. And it's not just an operating system, right? It's standard operating procedures for the entire organization. Those things are critical. Doesn't mean that you as the visionary have to draft them. It just means that you have to be accountable for ensuring that there are systems in place across all aspects of your business. You can't run a big company, you can't grow a company to be big by running it by the seat of your pants, right? You need to have process and systems in place. And then third is protecting your time to do what only you can do, right? You are your role as visionary, as relationships, as strategy. Like that's not optional. That is the real job of a CEO. And a lot of CEOs understand that. However, they allow their calendars to be sucked apart by all of these things that have nothing to do with the visionary, the relationship, the strategy, right? Getting sucked in the day-to-day, getting sucked into things that don't help drive the business forward. So protect your calendar. I'm a huge fan of calendar blocking. Every CEO that I work with, if they're not already calendar blocking, it's the first thing we do is ensure that they're successfully calendar blocking their time. They're putting aside time for visionary work, for relationship building, for strategy work, in addition to the time they need to run the day-to-day parts of the business. So management systems, I know we touched about this for a little bit, but this is such a big deal. It really deserves its own section. All right, so this is the third biggest reason that we see companies fail to scale. And this might sound familiar, but again, this lack of a management system, it means that you don't have the strategy or structure in place for the business to run efficiently. So as you grow, the problems become bigger and bigger. So here's what we see all the time. Every department is running its own playbook, right? Maybe sales has their own metrics, operations has their own dashboards, a leadership team, maybe they meet irregularly. There's no regular rhythm to the business. And without a system, the organization runs on personalities and not process. So this is where, founder-run organizations will often start to see the seams come apart of the business is because they run off that founder's personality and you don't have a process in place that is replicatable as you hire new and different talent as the business grows. And when you're scaling, this kind of talent problem becomes a real problem because people come and go. But systems keep that machine running even as people change. So having a system in place will allow you to overcome talent turnover. And a management system isn't about bureaucracy, it's about clarity. It creates a structure for decision making, for problem solving, for accountability, but also for setting goals, right? Because if as an organization, the visionary can get everyone together to create and set unified goals and have everyone work together towards those goals on a regular basis, you can make really meaningful impact on growing the business. And let me tell you what a management system actually does when it's working is help you scale. So first, it's going to help you align priorities, right? It's going to ensure that everyone in your organization knows exactly what matters, whether it's this quarter or next quarter, but it allows you to ensure that you're working on things that are moving the business forward on a regular basis. A lot of companies will sit down, they do the yearly planning, they have all these big visions, they don't have a management system in place. So once they have these ideas, there is no regular progress towards meeting those goals. With a management system, you are working every single day and reporting every single week on working on these big, audacious plans to grow the business so that over time, by taking these small steps every day, they add up to really meaningful growth and meaningful change over longer periods of time. The second thing is it creates a rhythm. So whether that's weekly leadership meetings or monthly performance reviews, maybe quarterly resets, these keep the business on the same beat, right? Everyone moving together, everyone gathering back together on a regular basis to share progress. It creates this kind of pulse within the organization so that everyone feels more aligned. And then the third, it reinforces accountability. You're going to hear that word accountability so much across this presentation is because accountability is critical to growing. When no one is accountable, or individuals aren't accountable, the business can't grow because you hit walls, right? Because the accountability doesn't or isn't happening, the tasks needed to grow don't end up getting delivered. And you don't need to chase people down when a goal or a metric is transparent, right? So when everyone knows what you're working towards, when everyone is measured visibly and publicly against what you're growing towards, then there's nowhere to hide, right? And it creates an organization where that clarity is there, and it ensures that accountability happens. So, how do you fix this? The first is pick a proven framework. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great management systems out there. For my first couple businesses, we used EOS. I thought it was great. It's a good kind of like starting management structure. There's a lot of documentation out there. It's exceptionally formulaic. So, and it fits, generally most business categories. I don't know if it fits all of them, but it fits, most kind of, general business categories, and it covers much of the issues that a business could come up against. It doesn't cover all of them, but it's a good kind of like starting point for operating system. I've also used Scaling Up, which is a really good one. Has a little bit more customization and a little bit more growth minded, where I think EOS may be slightly more maintenance minded, but generally I think they both work really well. I've used both of those for the first couple of companies I founded. I've implemented other companies I've ran along the way as well. Within our organization, we built our own, we call it BOSS, business operating system and support. But the idea behind that is to be a little bit more customized and give you more tools and a customized cadence so that it is mirrors the culture of your organization. So with EOS and Scaling Up, you're going to have to kind of change your organization to fit their method, where our system, you kind of can mold the system around your culture. But whatever you pick, doesn't really matter, as long as you have a framework that everyone can understand and implement on a consistent way. That's really what's critical. Second is, once you have your system, you got to commit as a team. So the mistake a lot of companies make is they start cherry picking. They run one meeting from EOS, they pick a couple KPIs from Scaling Up, maybe they have a goal or OKRs that they use, and nothing really sticks because you're not running one playbook, and or individual departments are running their own version of that management system. So there's no consistent methodology across the organization, and there's no documentation of that. So if you don't have that documentation, if you don't have that consistency across all departments, it is more likely to slowly degrade over time, because new people coming in don't know how to use it, don't know what it is, they're not trained on it. When you move from role to role, the system may change, so you're kind of starting over, and you may not follow the method that was originally intended. So it just kind of makes it harder to deploy and maintain a system if there isn't full commitment to one system across the organization. And the third is measure and refine. And this is where I probably found the biggest challenge with some of the systems out there like EOS and Scaling Up. It allows you to measure your activities and your progress to goal. It doesn't allow you to really measure the effectiveness of the system itself and make modifications to meet the needs of your business. I think that's really critically important, is that you should start small. Start with small steps. In the first 90 days, implement the elements of your system that are focused on consistency, and then review what's working and what's not working. And then start to adjust and modify the system to meet the needs of your business. Typically, what we see from the system, the organizations that do it well, is you start with 4 or 5 things that you're doing that are part of your system, and you're adding 1 or 2 new ones every month, so that over the course of 12 months, you slowly implement the entire system, right? So you're not just throwing a big complex system at the organization and expecting it to be adopted tomorrow. You're starting with things that are easiest to adopt and easiest to implement, and you're slowly adding more along the way, so that you start to build that muscle memory around the individual elements of the system. So by the time you're done, at the end of the year, you have a fully baked operating system, you have all the tools that you need, and you have a system that's documented that can be replicatable as new talent comes into the organization. Now, that doesn't mean never, don't stop evolving. You should continue to measure and refine and evolve the system as you go. We encourage our clients every year, kind of shake the etch sketch and reevaluate, is the system we have in place the right one? Are there changes being made? If there's changes needed, then let's roll that out over time. Again, never ripping off the Band-Aid, but slowly making changes so that it's easier to be adopted by the entire organization. And the next gap we see is in leadership capacity, or really it's the leadership mindset. And one person can be the only way a business integrates or innovates or grows. You can have the best product, you can have a killer sales team, you can have a great marketing funnel, but if your executives aren't growth minded, your company won't grow. You need talent that is as growth minded as you want the company to be. So scaling requires leaders who are curious, who learn, who adapt, especially for your growth leaders, right? And the ones that I would call growth leaders would be your marketing leader, your sales leader, and then your strategy leader, right? And sometimes those are the same person. Sometimes those are a couple different people. There's a lot of organizations where there's a CRO who's responsible for sales and marketing, and there's maybe someone else who's in charge of strategy, maybe product strategy or innovation. But those individuals need to be growth minded. They need to be curious. They need to be asking questions. They need to be individuals who can adapt. And if you're head of sales or you're head of marketing, or you're head of revenue, can't grow and adapt, then you're going to be limited in your ability to grow as a business. So they all collectively need to co-own this growth strategy. And growth-minded leaders don't wait for the world to change. They're going to go out and meet that change, which is one of the reasons why they're curious, right? You need to find people who are seeking change, who are curious about how the category is changing, how they are changing, how their people are changing. So when you're hiring or promoting leaders, look for curiosity over comfort. Someone who's asking why things work the way they do, not just repeating that it's always worked that way. My biggest red flag when interviewing a leader is when ask why they do something the way they do. The answer is, well, we've always done it that way, and that is a huge red flag, because that should never be a reason that something is done. And I realize that in a lot of companies it is done that way, but there are usually other underlying drivers of why change hasn't happened, right? Maybe you don't have the right talent, right? If you're trying to move from a traditional relationship based selling team to a prospecting hunter mentality, the talent you have on the sales team is critical, right? You have to have the right kind of people in those roles. So maybe it's being done the right way, a certain way, because the talent can only execute that way, right? And so we need to look at talent first before we can look at change. But if growth-minded people understand that, people who aren't growth-minded will just default to it's always been done that way. Then once you've identified those growth-minded leaders, you've got to invest in their development with real time, real budget, real coaching. You can't expect innovation from people who never leave their own bubble. And the companies I see that have the fastest turnaround in growth mindset are the ones that set budget aside for investing in training of their senior talent. We a lot of times will put budget aside for investing in the youngest talent to grow, but the reality is the biggest impact that you can make in transforming your business is by having your most senior people up to speed on the most innovative strategies, the newest ideas, the newest tactics, because those are the ones that set the plan. And if the plan isn't innovative and new and different, then it doesn't matter how smart the execution team is. You've got to have the right plan in place. And you can only do that with people who are curious and innovative and have learned what's happening in the world and have perspectives on new ideas to implement. And then finally, this bridge between sales and marketing, that gap is critical. And it can too often be a gap that's too big for an organization to cross. The best growth leaders can speak both languages. Doesn't mean that you have to have one person for sales and marketing, though, again, a lot of companies do have now CROs who are responsible for both. But it at the very least means you have to be fluent, right? They need to understand what pipeline and brand means, what tactic and strategy means and what implementation of those actually involves. So you need people who have diverse fluency if you want to be able to have an organization that's going to grow. This kind of cross-pollination of different perspectives then allows the head of sales and the head of marketing to have active discourse and debate when there's a new strategy being considered, right? Whether it's sales strategy or marketing strategy. What you don't want is a marketing team that comes in and presents their marketing plan and a sales team that comes in and presents their sales plan, and they don't ask each other questions. They don't debate each other. They don't push each other to think differently or think in new ways, right? If you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult for your organization. Okay, so let's talk about your growth engine. So your growth engine is the method of the process by which you are going to scale. And if you don't have a growth engine, you're not going to scale, right? You're going to be stuck hitting a brick wall every single year. So scaling isn't just about having the flashiest marketing or the most aggressive sales team. It's about having a repeatable process. Every single company that we work with, we see a unique balance between sales and marketing, right? Sometimes marketing leads, sometimes sales leads, sometimes they work together. But even when one or the other leads, the amount of how much of the effort falls upon one of them is different every time. It's going to be dependent on the category, the business, the culture of the company, the product, the service, et cetera. Those are all going to dictate what that balance is. But for some, marketing drives demand, and for others, sales unlocks distribution. For others, the sales is king and marketing just fuels top of funnel. Whichever you land on, the key is consistency. You need to consistently activate. You need to have consistent messaging. You have a consistent follow-up and consistent follow-through. So wherever you fall on this kind of sales and marketing integration, you need to have a method that is, or process that is predictable. And if it's predictable, then it can be repeatable. And if you repeat it, you're going to have plenty of data so that you can measure it and then predict what changes need to be made. And if you then predict those changes, you then repeat the process, you can then measure again and create that innovation cycle so that your growth engine is always evolving as your business evolves and as the category evolves. Okay, so a growth engine isn't just momentum, it's a machine. It's one of the reasons we call it an engine. So first, you've got to define that growth model, right? You start by saying, how am I going to create a process that is going to grow the business? And in some businesses, marketing leads and sales follows, closes. And in others, sales is the spearhead and marketing is the support. So you got to know your model. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. We have seen every kind of sales and marketing collaboration work. So as long as you identify what's going to work for your organization and you repeat it, you'll be able to evolve it and you'll be fine. Secondly, you've got to document it, right? So once you have a growth model in place, you got to fully document it. Then this literally means mapping out how a lead moves through your world, what happens to it, who owns it, what defines success at every stage. Without this roadmap, you will not be able to repeat that process, and it will be exceptionally difficult for you to onboard new talent as they come in the organization so that they understand whether you're on sales, when you're on marketing, whether you're on customer success or whatever, that having that fully documented is the way that you can train your process to new talent. So that's really critical. And the third is measuring, right? You've got to measure weekly, not quarterly. You can't wait until you've missed a quarterly goal to look at the data, because by the time that happens and you look at the data and you come up with a new plan and you implement that new plan, you have now burned half the year. Right? Instead, you've got to make small adjustments as you go so that you're staying ahead of the curve. So your marketing organization should be reporting to you on a weekly basis about how it's performing to plan, as well as what optimizations or changes they're recommending. Same goes for the sales team. You need to be looking at leading and lagging metrics on a weekly basis to ensure that you are tracking a plan and that you're making adjustments if you're falling behind on any of these early indicators. I've been shocked, quite honestly, to see how many sales teams don't report to the founder or the CEO weekly, and either rely on monthly or quarterly reporting. I've also been shocked to see how few predict the revenue that they're going to close on a given month. Right? If you're not predicting your revenue, you're not putting a stake in the ground, you then don't have anything to measure against. So making sure that you have KPIs in place that are weekly and measured weekly, reported weekly, and also looked at through a monthly lens is really critical. Okay, so product evolution. The last biggest barrier that we see is product evolution. And we say product, but this could be product or service, right? We're in this sense, we're talking about how you go to market with whatever the solution is that you're trying to sell. And early stage companies obsess over product market fit. I mean, I've been in some many startups, and PMF is the acronym that is uttered on a daily basis across all the different departments. And once they find PMF, once they find product market fit, they stop questioning it and they stop asking, is this what our market needs? And a scaling company never stops asking, never stops listening to the market to understand that they are bringing the right product to market if there's still a market fit. So the great companies have structured ways to engage the market, to hear the voice of the customer, and to look for those unmet needs, right? And it doesn't really matter. Like every organization is going to have a different person that's responsible for the voice of the customer. A lot of times it's sales, but sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's product marketing, it could be customer success. Whatever it is, you need to know who owns the voice of the customer and who is out there seeking to continuously calculate whether you're still on strategy with your product or service. So product market fit isn't a one-time event, right? It's a moving target. It is going to change across the product or the service lifecycle. And the best companies are listening intentionally. They're not just to customers, but to the people who talk to customers every day, right? So companies that listen deeply, they find new opportunities. So an example of like your different channels we talked about a second ago, it could be your sales team, it could be customer interviews. It could be customer reviews on your website, on your product pages, frontline feedback that you're hearing through customer success, even industry trends. I do find if you're listening to us industry trends as your voice of the customer, you're going to be far behind others who are listening directly to the customer as they're starting to talk about unmet needs. Because it takes a while for customers to talk about unmet needs before it bubbles up into an industry trend. However, if you are behind the eight ball, you haven't been, talking to your customers, trends are definitely a starting point for companies to be looking at a way to continuously evaluate whether they have a product market fit. And then the other one's like lost deal analysis. And we probably don't spend enough time looking at deals we lose to understand like what can we learn from them. This is more than just sending out a survey. It's an intentional, structured listening process, right? Asking the right questions to a customer, not just hearing from the salesperson why they lose it, but listening to the customer as to why they lost it, right? That's where the biggest insight comes from. And it's asking customers like, what are you frustrated about? What's missing in the market? What problem do you wish somebody solved? And you've heard that tired line of what keeps you up at night. I don't like that line because I think it's like too ethereal. But I do think you can ask real questions about, what problem do you wish was solved right now? Because it's probably a problem that they actively have at the moment, have a real need for. And so companies who do this, they don't just grow, they lead the industry because they are meeting the needs of the customer first, and they're out in front of where trends within the industry are going. So once a year, challenge your product or your service team to go out and ask, is this still the best way to solve the problem that we set out originally to solve? And if not, change it. Like be okay with shaking the edge of sketch and starting over, or changing the business, the service, the product in a way that's going to meet the evolving needs of the category. And this doesn't mean that you stop doing what you were doing, right? There may still be a need for the original product or service, but that need may be evolving. You may need to find a new version of the product or service that will eventually replace, your original core product or service in the future. And look, don't overcomplicate innovation. Test small ideas fast, launch them, learn, adjust. That's how you stay ahead of the industry instead of trying to play catch up. Okay, so just again, let me wrap this up. These are the most common reasons that companies fail, and the truth is, Every one of them is fixable. Accountability is easy to implement when you have commitment across the organization. Founders want to step out and be the bottleneck. They want to step out of being the bottleneck and solve bigger problems. And they just need the plan and the systems to do that. Leadership want to grow. And if you don't have leadership that want to grow, you need to find leadership that wants to grow. Systems will help you create freedom. So implementing systems that allow for consistency across the organization will give you the freedom to grow the business. Making sure that you have a growth engine. A lot of companies have it and it's not documented, so it's not being repeated consistently. So making sure that you A, have one, and B, that it's documented and replicatable is really critical. And then the last one is product stagnation. You've got to, again, make sure that you're continuously to question whether you have the right product, the right service. If you do all those things, scaling isn't about luck or timing, it's about discipline, right? And this solving these problems gives you the discipline to build the system, to grow leaders, and to keep evolving the business so that you're going to be able to scale. All right, so if you're wondering where do I start small. So get your leadership together, align around accountability. Like I always find that's a starting point. If you have accountability, great. If you think you have accountability, make sure that everyone else agrees, because sometimes the founder is accountability blind and they think there's accountability happening when there really isn't. Make sure that you have that in your organization first. Once you've done that, then you can start to install a management system and just really systems in general to ensure that there's consistency in implementation. And then look at that growth engine, make sure that you've got the people in place and the strategy in place that's going to grow the business, and ultimately continue to evolve that product and service over time through listening to the customer. Like this is the way that we go, that we often see companies go from stuck to scaling by systematically taking on the biggest roadblocks that they have. So Jen, I'm gonna throw it back
Okay.
to you.
That was, I mean, incredible. I personally have already taken away so many things. I'm jotting down a whole bunch of notes that I think are applicable to not only to us, but I think to a lot of our clients and business owners. So I have a whole slew of questions that, if you don't mind, we've got about 10 minutes left. I would love to dive into some of these questions and encourage the audience to also ask any questions that they want through the comments section. I'll get them funneled over to me and we can go ahead and make sure that we get those addressed as well. So I want to start off with something that you brought up that resonated with me is how to get the visionary out of the day-to-day. But that really requires deep trust in a number two to kind of take over the reins. You're literally handing the reins of something that you're so proud of building to somebody else. And I think a key question that several of our clients have asked is like, really, how do I find that number two? So I'd love to hear, do you have any tips and tricks on how to source that person?
So there's a couple different roles that will often be that number two. It's either going to be the chief operating officer. It's going to be, or it could be someone in charge of strategy or product, or, and this is one of the ones we're seeing more regularly now, it will be a chief of staff. And a chief of staff is kind of that hybrid between an executive assistant and a COO. Their job is to take strategy from the founder and then ensure that it gets implemented through the different departments, right? They're going to be a little bit less senior and experienced than a COO, but they're gonna have the personality, the cultural aspect to be able to get stuff done, right? And hold individuals accountable to implementation. Whichever route you go, there's no right or wrong. It's going to be depending on where do you find the talent, but you got to find that talent and you got to invest in it early and do it before you have to. The minute you have it, you have to have it. It's too late. You're going to spend the rest of your time playing catch up, and you're probably going to make bad hiring decisions because now there's a sense of urgency to fill that role because you're so stuck in the weeds. When you're stuck in the weeds, firefighting, you can't lift your head up and make really smart, strategic, conscious decisions about talent. So, by the time you need it, it's probably too late. So be proactive. And if you are already in the weeds and you need it implemented ASAP, you still have to be picky and you still have to find the right cultural fit. I love this kind of trend towards a chief of staff because I think it is a very, very valuable role. It's not as a big of an investment as a COO, and not all companies need a COO. They're not maybe not big enough where a COO is is critical, and they're not then responsible for 100% of the business. There's still
Right.
accountability to running the business from the founder, but that chief of staff is there to ensure that the vision from the founder and the strategy from the founder is implemented. They project manage the implementation of change versus a COO who'd be more responsible for developing the strategy, right? The CEO gets the vision, the COO develops strategy, and then is responsible for implementation. So you can craft the roles to fit the needs of the business, the size of the business, the amount that the individual can invest as well. I don't like, and what I see most commonly is you instead create this executive team of leaders of each individual department. And what happens is one founder has 7 or 8 people that are part of the executive team, and they think having senior people at each department then means that their vision will be implemented. And the reality is, the more people, the more cooks in the kitchen you have, the more likely to have a disharmony on the implementation of a strategy. So while it can work for some, it's a lot more challenging because now you're managing lots of different personalities. So I always think that number two is important, whether it's a COO or a head of product or a chief of staff. Like that, number two is really critical.
Okay, that's super helpful. Now, you mentioned accountability and you're talking about ego and the concept of healthy conflict. That requires a serious level of self-awareness from these leaders. How does a leader develop that skill of like kind of humility, the open-mindedness, and really like leaning into knowing what they don't know?
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, it's got to be, I think that's this call is being modeled by the founder, right? So the rest of the team will not model that behavior if the founder doesn't do that. One of the things that I've seen as a helpful tool for those who don't, that maybe are blinded a little bit is, giving the leadership team the authority to say the thing and call out when they see someone not being accountable, and reinforcing when that happens that this isn't punitive. This is we just need to we need to have that honest conversation. And when the founder can do it or the CEO can do it, the rest of the organization will follow through. It's also, if someone's not accountable consistently and refuses to be, it's usually someone that needs to be coached up or out of the business, right? We spend a lot of time worried about the expertise that one individual brings, even if they are a toxic personality or they're not holding the values of the business. And even if you have a critical skill that's needed, if you don't have the right culture, that skill becomes kind of meaningless. So, some organizations find that they just have to change talent out to get accountability. It doesn't happen as often as you think. I think the reality is most executives are ready to be accountable. They just need the structure and the systems to be accountable. And that's the other thing. Without systems in place, without measurement, it's really hard to be accountable. I can't tell you how many times I sit on like an L10 for a client for the very first time, and they go through and they talk about problems, and then they never actually get to a resolution of the problem. They don't agree to the thing they're going to do. And then at the end, they don't recap what we've all committed to. With that last piece, you really can't have accountability. It's very difficult to have accountability. So that's kind of really key, is that you've got to like land the plane on what we're agreeing to and make sure that it is said. It is clear and concise, it's documented, and that we all leave the meeting, the session, whatever, with the same clarity of that commitment.
That's incredible. And we've got a question from the audience on how to cultivate psychological safety in enforcing accountability.
Yeah. So first off, one of the things that we do when we first start with a client is that we reiterate in every single meeting, even though we have, recording bots that are joining every call nowadays, right? Because no one wants to take notes. We remind everyone that, every meeting is confidential, that notes aren't shared outside of the team that's on the call, unless something immoral or illegal is stated. But as long as those two things don't happen, like that, this meeting has to, the information has to stay there, right? And so that reminder on a regular basis is really important. And obviously, you've got to then actually show it. You've got to, you can't just say that there's confidentiality, but there has to actually be confidentiality. There also can't be punitive, punitive measures taken when a mistake is learned about, right? And so that's really important. And then the leader's got to be part of it, right? If they're not part of being accountable, being transparent, then no one's going to be vulnerable if the leader isn't vulnerable and isn't willing to share and isn't willing to take responsibility and accountability for mistakes. So it's got to start really there, and then it's got to follow through maintaining that trust at all, throughout the executive team or throughout the team that's participating. And when someone breaks that trust, there has to be a punitive measure. And
Hmm.
the only time that punitive measures come in is when trust is broken. And so that is one, that's really critically important. There needs to be visible um, outcomes when trust is broken, of the group.
As a follow-up question to that, how do you get the executive team to really buy into any of these systems, whether it's EOS, scaling up, or BOSS, which I think is a phenomenal acronym, by the way. But like, how do you get the executive team? So usually what I find and what I hear is that you've got maybe 6 people on the leadership team or the executive team. You've got buy-in from 4, maybe 5, but there's always that one person or that 2 people that just aren't buying in. So how do you get everyone to get aligned?
Well, you got to start with champions, right? And there spent much of my time in the sales side, and I went through Miller Hyman training, and one of the things that they talk about within that sales training, methodology is finding an internal coach or champion, right? And that's the way that we look at it. You've got to find a coach or champion within the team who is going to buy in wholeheartedly and champion it when the founder or the outside consultant or whoever isn't in the room. And that voice is really critically important. I will say when an operating system is implemented properly, most executive teams immediately see the benefit of it, because the things they've been craving, accountability, clarity, and transparency, are almost immediately implemented. I mean, it takes like a few weeks as you add new tools and as you add new elements to fully get there, but you see change almost immediately. And so that is super beneficial. You've also got to have growth minded people. You got to have people who understand that change is good. And look, I've had a few clients I've worked with where I knew on day one they are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people in that room who were no interest at all, period, in changing. They were not growth minded. They would put up every roadblock to change. And in those scenarios, without talent turnover, you may not be able to get everyone to buy in. However, if you get the majority of people to buy in, then you can still, the outliers become so much more evident. So
Mm-hmm.
again, if you start with one, build from there, and you'll eventually either find there's no outliers or there are outliers. And those outliers will be very easy to spot and very easy to coach up or out of the business.
I've got 2 questions, hopefully one that I think may be a little bit more crisper, which is how do you define the right scorecard metrics or the KPIs? Because that is something that we have struggled with. We're always evolving our scorecard. I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do you define the right KPIs?
So the fewer the better. I think one trap we all fall into as businesses, we create too many KPIs, and then we're measuring so many different things we don't know what to look at. And there is no like finite, final, like this is exactly what it should be. What's one of the reasons that our system is meant to be very customized. But what I found generally as a starting point is I really love 2 leading metrics and 2 lagging metrics for each of the major departments. Doesn't mean that every department gets 2 and 2, but the big ones, sales should have usually have 2 and 2, and marketing probably has 2 and 2. That may be it, right? Maybe operations has a couple, who knows? But 2 leading, 2 lagging, 2 of them are activity metrics that will predict whether what we're doing today should arrive at get to the right outcome tomorrow. And then lagging metrics are metrics that prove that the activities we did effectively, right? So let's talk sales for a second. A leading metric may be for the sales team, sales calls or phone calls and emails. And a lagging metric may be meetings and deal pipeline, new deals, right? So those 2 first ones show that the sales team is doing the activities, and the 2 lagging show that those activities are leading to things that are meaningful to the business. On the marketing side, it may be clicks on ads, and it may be forms filled, and the lagging may be uh, webinars participated in and leads generated, marketing qualified leads generated, right? So again, two things that we can control that are activity based, and then two things that show that the work that we did actually arrived at an outcome that was meaningful. So that's the way I look at it: two and two, two leading, two lagging.
That's great. That's awesome. Now, last question, it might be a little bit of a big question, but product evolution. Obviously, AI is here and it's coming fast. I'd love to know, how are you navigating companies who are stuck trying to figure out how to incorporate AI, whether they even should. Talk to me about the wave of evolution, or the way of AI, and how that's evolving what you're doing.
So a lot of companies get stuck because there's so many things you can do that they get frozen from actually taking action. And they end up debating every solution, every option, every department that could benefit, every security risk, etc. And what we have believed generally is that if you haven't started implementing AI today, you're way behind. And the only way that you can catch up is getting started. So start small. Find simple ways that have low risk that you can start to gain adoption today. Because if you have a team that isn't using it today and you wait a year or two from now, the complexity of the systems is growing infinitely. It is dramatically harder and more complex to use ChatGPT, or at least to get out of ChatGPT what you want today than what you tried to do a year ago. Because there's so many more options, right? There's so many things it can do. And I'm just taking like the most ubiquitous one, right? Now you get into like other more specialized tools, and they are getting harder and harder to use. And most people say they're getting easier and easier. The reality is, to use them in a business setting is getting more and more complex. When you think about security measures, data integrity, hallucinations and accuracy, like there are so many things that you have to tackle to ensure that it's being implemented properly, and being used properly and being monitored properly. So if you don't start today, then you will have no systems in place tomorrow. And so we always recommend start small. Find simple ways that you can integrate AI into your organization, and usually by department or level. Right? We have one client who they structured their organization into 5 levels, and those levels were, some of it had to do with seniority, and other parts of it had to do with like job type and how AI could assist those individuals in their role. And then each one had a different definition of what their expected AI use was. And some at the very basic would only use GPT technology for email creation and proofing, document review, document proofing. And others, as they went up the ladder, had more a higher requirement of AI use within their day to day. That was for them. Year one was just define those 5 different levels and start to get the team trained on the most basic ones and use them in the most basic way, so that in year two they could have a higher level of expectation, and they could have some data, some feedback on, okay, what was working, what should we lean into, what should we not, and what should we systematize, right? What do we need to take and build our own version, right? Do we need our own LLM for our business that speaks our language, that knows, our case histories, that will then make it, more likely that we're not hallucinating and making stuff up or talking in a different language, right? So but you got to start somewhere, right? So start small. It's easier to start with one step than to start, sprinting.
Yeah. Well, Brad, this has been so incredibly valuable, and I hope all of our listeners agree. I'm very, I've got so many takeaways. My head is already spinning on all the things that I want to implement to ourselves, and I'm so grateful for the time that you've shared with us. And I'm excited to share to our audience that we've got a surprise Thrive Talk coming up next Tuesday. It's going to be about taxes. It's going to be really questioning the CPA, and really the relationship that you have with your CPA, and and really how to maximize that relationship in a way that sets you up for success beyond what your CPA may be comfortable with. So very excited about that Thrive Talk. We're going to be sending out some emails coming up in the next probably 24 hours. So please be on a lookout for that information. We'll also be posting it on our socials. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to Brad. So appreciate the time and the presentation. We'll be sending out this recording, and I'm looking forward to next Tuesday in our next Thrive Talk. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.